Okay. So trying to pick up from where we were. It's been a while. And I think that we're up to the bottom of 15b1. That's what I think we're up to. And where it says the Gemara returns to its exposition of the Megillah's narrative. I think that's where we'll start. Okay, good. Everybody have it?
Wait, tell me where again?
15b1, bottom of the right-hand column.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
very good. All right, so who's going to read for us, please?
Ordinarily, I would step right up, but I'm having trouble.
You muted yourself also. You got it? 15b1?
I do.
Good. Last few lines, the last 5-6 lines on the bottom.
2 seconds. 15b1, last couple lines on the right-hand column.
Yep.
The Gemara returns to its exposition of the Megillah's narrative. And she, Esther, stood in the inner court of the king's house. Rabbi Levi said, as soon as she reached the chamber of idols on her way through the palace to Achashverosh, the divine presence departed from her.
Okay, so let's catch up a little bit on what we've been studying. So we went through, we're going through the Megillah verse by verse, practically chapter by chapter, and according to the next place that we're at right now, Mordechai has prevailed upon Esther to agree to jeopardize herself, to risk her life, and more than that, if there you can imagine that, to plead the case of the Jewish people before Achashverosh. Right, and then she says, but I haven't been called to Achashverosh for over a month, and he doesn't like it. And if you can't go to him, he has to call you. And if he doesn't like you, he sees you, interrupting him, he'll, off with your head. So, and Mordechai says, no, but this is, why do you think you became queen if not for this moment? So, so she dons her royal garb. And this is something for us to take into account here, that the Gemara says, when it says she dons her royal garb, Atilbash Esther Malchut, it doesn't say she put on clothing of royalty, she put on royalty. So the Gemara says that means that the Shekhinah enveloped her, that the Holy Spirit was with her, right? So she was inspired and she was sustained by God's presence to be able to do this mission, which it was totally frightening and very, very dangerous. So that's the background now that we have to read this particular statement in, where Rabbi Levi says, read it one more time, please.
Rabbi Levi said, as soon as she reached the chamber of idols on her way through the palace to Achashverosh, the divine presence departed from her.
Right. So here she is. She's all ready to go. She's moving toward closer and closer to the king's chamber, and says Rabbi Levi that she, walking through this palace, she comes to the chamber of the idols, and the idol, the presence of idolatry in that chamber makes the divine presence go away. The divine presence can't abide in such a terrible place, and she ends up being bereft. So here we have this terrible situation where she thought she was being supported, she thought she was being protected, and then, right when she gets into the lion's den, so to speak, the protection, up and disappears. So what does Rabbi Levi say? Continue.
And she exclaimed, my God, why have you forsaken me?
So then she says, this is a Psalm 22, a verse from Psalm 22. The entire verse is understood by and we'll see some of it in our text, was understood as being Esther's prayer. This phrase might ring a bell with some of us as being attributed to somebody else.
Yes.
So, and of course, when they say it, they're quoting. They're not saying it. They didn't make it up on their own, but they're referring to this text. So this text is a text from Psalms, and says, my God, Keli, Keli, lama azavtani. Why have you forsaken me? Why have you left me alone? So this is Rabbi Levi putting these two texts together, right? And of course, what it means is that this is a standard text, a traditional text that many people over the millennia have recited in a time of crisis where they feel, God, where are you? Why aren't you with me at this point? You don't have to be Esther. You don't have to be Jesus. Everybody and anybody. The psalm was written zillions of years ago, before Esther existed, before anybody of these, or Jesus existed. The psalmists themselves, they know this feeling, right? They know what this feeling is. They know the despair, and they know the shock and the sense of being appalled. How could you leave me? How can you leave me now? So that's the story. I'm going to just digress for a second. I think I've told this story already. A number of years ago, not too many years ago, a few years ago, in Montclair, I was walking by a church, and they had a big banner out, "Love thy neighbor as thyself," Matthew chapter 3. So something like that. Now, I don't remember which chapter it is. So I'm looking at this, I'm going, what? And it's true. In Matthew, Jesus says that one of the main, the two main commandments of the Torah are to love God and love your neighbor as yourself. He's quoting Leviticus, right? He's quoting Leviticus. He's quoting the quote unquote Old Testament. He's quoting the Hebrew Bible. He's quoting the Torah. But, therefore, it's like saying, in the United States capital is Washington, Wikipedia, or so, I don't know. It's like, fourscore and how many years ago? Fourscore and 7 years ago.
7.
Yes, fourscore and 7 years ago. Quote unquote. What's your source? Wikipedia. So I contacted the minister and I said, this is playing into an old idea that all the good stuff is in the Christian Bible and all the terrible, fire and brimstone is in the Jewish Bible, and get your citation correct. I mean, you at least put both of them in, but this reinforces, and many Jews think of it also, how come we don't have love thy neighbor as yourself in our, why do we have all the crummy stuff? Because we have been, brainwashed, within a Christian civilization to think that way. So this phrase, my God, why have you forsaken me, is much more famous. If you ask anybody, and Christians know the Hebrew Bible better than we do. If you ask any of them, who said that? When was that said? It'll be, identified as a Christian statement. It's not. It's actually a kind of a universal statement that then each tradition has, unfortunately had occasion to go to, because it is such a human feeling that God has forsaken us. So
how did
Yeah,
the minister
no.
respond? How did the minister respond?
they took down the sign.
Oh,
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, the minister answered me and said, you're right. I didn't think about it. I wasn't thinking, about that. But instead of, fixing it or adding to it, which is what I would have been happy with,
Yeah.
they just took down the sign. So you're not supposed to love your neighbor as yourself anymore. It's okay.
Because the Jews said that.
Right. Yeah, Jen.
If it makes you feel better, I regret that I have but one life for my country was also a quote.
Oh, yeah,
Yes,
where?
it's from a play called Cato by, I think, Addison, maybe Joseph Addison, but it wasn't
Oh.
original to Hale, but no one would actually ever know now that it was
Right.
by somebody else.
Right.
Much less serious case, but it does happen.
Right. Yes. Yep.
The thing that's upsetting is that he took it down instead of acknowledging from where it came.
No, he what
I
didn't.
think those banners are
he did-
expensive, that's all.
Yeah, they just didn't have the budget to do it, to fix it and so on. They didn't want to like put scotch tape on it or something.
Ah,
He didn't mean any, I know the person, I wouldn't have contacted him probably if I didn't know him very, very well personally. He's a very, very good person, and very, very much sensitive to all of these issues. And, we all make little slip ups every once in a while.
It would have been a good topic for a sermon for him, though.
Maybe he gave a sermon. I don't know.
Mhm.
I don't give sermons, so I don't know. So that's it. So, okay, so back to this. So this is continuing, Rabbi Levi is continuing to imagine what's going on in Esther's very, very anxious, mind. She's in emotional turmoil, and he's imagining what she's thinking. So why, God, have you forsaken me? Continue.
Could it be perhaps because you treat an inadvertent offense like an intentional one, or an offense committed under coercion like one committed willingly?
Okay, that's rhetorical, right?
Yes.
So that's a way of saying, how could you judge me here? Now, why you're blaming me for doing something that's wrong? But again, it's an inadvertent offense. You're taking something that is not meant, to be done on purpose, but you're judging me as if I'm doing it on purpose. Something that I'm being forced to do. You're judging me as if I want to do this. So let's take a look at footnote 17. Nice long footnote.
Note 17. Esther said to God, even though I am apparently approaching Achashverosh of my own volition, this act is really committed under coercion, since I am compelled to go to Achashverosh to save the Jewish people.
Okay, so this is what is she referring to when she's talking about inadvertent and on purpose and coercion or voluntary? What is this sin that she's arguing with God? Don't account this as a sin for me. Don't blame me for this. There are extenuating circumstances. There are good reasons for doing this. What is she referring to? So Rashi says what she's referring to is that she's about to go to Achashverosh. And of course, it's not simply having a meal with him, but everything that goes, and ensues afterwards as well. So she, is worried that God is going to account her behavior with Achashverosh as sinful. So that's Rashi. Okay, so now let's see the discussion of that.
This reasoning seemingly contradicts what we learned above, that Esther was subsequently forbidden to her husband Mordecai for having willfully engaged in relations with Achashverosh. See above 15a, note 32.
You remember so well. We're on 15b.
Absolutely.
So this is 15a. We know this already, fresh.
If she was compelled to approach Achashverosh for the sake of her people, why was it considered a voluntary act?
Okay, so we talked about it a little bit back then, and here we have it reiterated. How do we see this? Here we have put in the mouth of Esther an argument which says this is not blameworthy. This is not a bad thing because it's for the sake of saving a life. It's for the sake of saving not just one life, but many, many, many lives. And, of course I would rather not do this, but I have to do this for the sake of my people. So this is placed here in the mouth of Esther with a very strong message of, so don't leave me, don't leave me. And of course, God doesn't leave her. God then helps her, to save the Jewish people. So this seems to be an argument for exoneration. But in 15a, we had the Gemara talk about Esther saying, if I do this, you and I, Mordechai, will never be able to live together again. Right? She says, you know that you're putting me in a position where I will therefore have to be sent away from you. We will not be able to be husband and wife again. And the Gemara accepts that. So which way is it? If it's not something that's blameworthy, as we say here, so why would she have to pay that price? David, you wanted to say something? You're on mute.
Please help me with the text. The words, even though I am apparently approaching under my own volition, those words, are they in the Megillah? I don't remember them as such.
No, none of this is in the Megillah.
None of this. Okay, so Rashi.
This is all Rabbi Levi.
Okay, so Rashi is having this conversation over the decades over the centuries.
Rashi is explaining the words of Rabbi Levi. Rabbi Levi is having the conversation. Rabbi Levi is giving a midrash on what's happening in Esther's mind while she's walking through the palace, step by step, coming closer to Achashverosh.
So this is Rashi. First of all, this is Rashi on the Talmud, not Rashi on the Megillah. Correct. Okay, good.
So it's Talmud on the Megillah, Rashi on the Talmud.
Right, good.
Right? Okay, good. Okay, so this is the question. Okay, so go ahead.
Shavut Yaakov explains that even though Esther was correct to approach Achashverosh, and indeed was obligated to do so, nevertheless, since the act itself was an intentional one, she became forbidden to her husband.
Okay, so this is the standard answer. At the end of the note, it says that there are other explanations. Marsha gives a different explanation. Other people give different explanations, but this is the standard explanation. So what this puts us before is a distinction that's being made that goes to the heart of traditional marriage theory, which I've talked about more than once, which I feel strongly has to be rejected and upended, so to speak. But the marriage theory that works within halakha is very well thought out. I think it's completely misconceived, but in its misconception, it's very thorough, very consistent, very strong. The marriage, the theory of marriage that the traditional halakha works with is that marriage is a unilaterally established relationship. The man takes control of the woman's sexual access by taking her to wife. And then there are other corollary things, economically and so on. But the essential aspect of exclusive control over the woman's sexual activities is central to the theory of marriage. Therefore, what happens if a marriage falls apart is that only the man can end it. Only the man can write a bill of divorce, a get. And if he doesn't want to, there's nothing you can do about it. On the other hand, if this exclusive sexual control of the man is broken in another way, for instance, if the woman commits adultery, then the man must divorce the wife because their marriage is a sham, because their marriage is meaningless, because he has not been able to control her sexual access. Somebody else has had access to living with her other than him. So ironically, that's the one way that the woman has some power to break the marriage. But of course, that power is off with her head because adultery is a capital offense. So if we have witnesses, if we don't have witnesses, but somehow we know it, then the marriage has to end. And of course, any children that are born from that illicit adulterous act are mamzerim, who are penalized forever. So this is central to their concept of what makes a marriage holy. So as I've said, again, many times, we need to do something different so that we don't get into that mess. And thankfully, a lot of the work that I did was then adopted by Rabbi Gail Leibovitz, and her proposal was finally adopted as a minority opinion, but still legitimate by the conservative movement about a year and a half ago. So now people are able to engage in an alternative marriage ceremony that doesn't end run around all of this terrible stuff. So this is to just introduce now the idea. So this is what the Shvut Yaakov says. This is what the Ma'arik says. This is what different major halachic commentators say, is we have to distinguish between whether the woman here, Esther, the wife, whether she is guilty of a terrible crime on her own. And the answer is no, she's not. She is sleeping with this guy, Achashverosh, in order to save the Jewish people. That's extenuating circumstances if we ever heard it. So she's not going to be, as she says here to God, you're not going to help me do this important mitzvah of saving lives. You have to. That's what it means to be God. So yes, she's totally exonerated. It's not going to be considered a willful act of adultery. However, de jure, if I can play as if I really actually know these things, these terms. So legally speaking, she's not guilty of an act of adultery for which she can be punished. On the other hand, de facto, she has broken the bond that the husband has created of exclusive rights to her sexual activities. Breaking that bond is a fact. Therefore, the marriage is over. So therefore, she will never be able to go back to Mordechai. However, she will not be considered as if she sinned with Achashverosh. Okay, this is the distinction that's being made by a number of these legal scholars, and they apply it to real life. So, as I say, it might be arguably consistent, as I said, with this theory of marriage that they are working with. Some people are not comfortable with that distinction, and the sense of justice that I feel, and I think I'm reading that they feel it quite strongly also, is, well, are you kidding? This is you can't make that kind of distinction. Before I get into what the other possible explanations here, I want to say that de facto, there is a real possibility of a marriage breaking up because of something like this. Marriages break up not only because of what's legally right or wrong. Marriages break up because of psychological and interpersonal dynamics that go on with what people can live with and what they can't live with, and right or wrong. So the distinction of saying, well, you know what, this marriage is gone, even though Esther really didn't do anything theoretically wrong, is definitely, a possible scenario. When we have the Sota example, right, that the Sota example is struggling with that kind of reality. You've got a jealous husband, and he may be totally wrong about what's going on with his wife. He's pathologically paranoid that because, she happens to say a friendly word to somebody, she must be having an affair with that person. And, it's more his problem than anybody else's, but because he's the husband, his problem is the problem, right? His problem creates a problem for everybody. So you have this ritual that's created by the Torah that is, a kind of a trial by ordeal. If she's guilty, she's gonna, explode, and by drinking this water. And as most commentators point out, so the chances of somebody exploding from drinking the water are very slim, but not not nothing, because psychologically it works that way too. But it would be a very dramatic way of hopefully putting a Band-Aid back on the marriage. See, you don't have to be so jealous. God has proven that nothing has happened. But whether the person will actually be able to overcome that kind of emotional turmoil is a question. So some people wanted to say a word or two here. Okay, Jen, then Stuart.
I just have a question. Is this whole, because I don't think the Megillah actually says Esther was married to her uncle, or so like when we're all talking about this, is it like, okay, let's take this headcanon and really roll with it as if it's truth, and let's extrapolate all this and how the laws would work? Or are they saying, wow, this particular sage's headcanon is actually like canon to us, it's the same thing as what's in the Megillah itself? Like what is the...
So it's the answer is, and you shouldn't be shocked by this, we don't care what's in the Megillah. We care how the rabbis read the Megillah.
Basically, their headcanon then becomes canon. Is it for us? Is it canon also?
That's why the Talmud is what we're studying, and we're not reading the Megillah. We're not Protestants. We're reading the Torah through the lens of commentary and interpretation that has been built up through the generations by the rabbinic community. We practice rabbinic Judaism, meaning that our canon is always filtered through the eyes of the rabbis.
So this is as good as canon then? It's as good as
It is
anything else
canon.
in the Torah? Yeah.
It is.
Okay.
It trumps what's in the Torah. The Torah
Okay,
says
thank
an
you.
eye for an eye. Let's take the simplest example. The Torah says an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. We say that's not what it means. It means
I feel like
pay
there's a
monetary
difference
damages.
between interpretation of how to carry something out, like damages is actually,
I mean, but that's
then
not an
actually creating...
interpretation. That's completely going against what the words of the Torah say. The Torah says it a number of times. Read my lips, says the Torah. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, a burn for a burn. That's what the Torah says it again and again. I mean, how much more clearly can the Torah speak? It's not like, the Torah says some kind of strange kind of syntax or uses a term that we're not quite sure what it means. The Torah is really straightforward. And we say, that's not what we're going to do. So
I get that. So along with that, we also have to accept every bit of fan fiction the sages wrote.
So that's the next step. So then the next step is, how many different ways are the rabbis speaking? When do the rabbis want us to take them totally seriously as a legal matter? And when do the rabbis want to bracket the legal issues from philosophical, poetic, imaginative kinds of things? And that's a really interesting struggle that happens throughout the generations, because there's a blurry line here. It's hard to to delineate and definitively say, this is law, this is just poetry. This is meant to be a metaphor, this is meant to be determinative, normative. That's a very rich question that people have been, arguing about. Because they try to make rules or they try to make some kind of theory. The theory is worthless unless you actually apply it to specific cases. This is an interesting case, right? Is this just some rabbi trying to be psychologically empathetic and give us some heart to the story and make it more real for us? Or does this actually have legal ramifications? So the answer is people argue about it. But they don't argue about if it were meant to be legally meaningful, then it is. That they don't argue about, right? So that's what I'm saying. Torah Shabbal Peh, the oral Torah, the development of the Torah we talked about before, making the Torah greater and greater. We didn't get to that as much. That's what we do, not just living the Torah as a practice, but our interpretive tradition becomes the Torah, and in some ways even overrules the Torah. But when do we mean it to be that way, and when are we just kidding? Is never 100% clear.
So if there's conflicting fan fiction or midrash, like, then it just stands there conflicting and
Yeah.
no,
Yeah,
okay.
and that's where the Torah is augmented. Look at how wonderful we have. We have all this fan fiction, to use your term, right? I would never use that term, but I'm learning it. So I'm, that my Torah is getting more aggrandized and glorious, as we study together. So yeah. So the
Okay.
fact is, and that's where the rabbis themselves say there are 70 faces to the Torah.
But then it's closed with the Talmud, like the red tent doesn't get to sneak in there.
Not quite. Because the Talmud stays pretty open-ended in terms of what it determines is the bottom line. That's one of the genius, or one of the problems, depending on how you look at it, that the Torah is not a law code. The Torah doesn't, law codes were developed later out of the frustration of saying, you know what, I can't figure out from the Talmud what I'm supposed to do. So how, let's figure it out. So the law codes are meant to be definitive. Here's the rule. This is what you should say in the morning in your prayer. This is when you should stand up. This is when you should sit down. This is what you can eat and this is what you can't eat. The Talmud doesn't give us clear enough. It has the arguments. It doesn't have necessarily the bottom line. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you for that response.
Stuart.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Stuart, you wanted to say something.
So if a married woman is raped or coerced into sex, that's not considered adultery.
Correct.
Okay, so she can remain married to her husband and
Right.
have
But
relations with him. and so forth.
if she goes along with it, then, in other words, if she wants to,
Right,
then she has broken her husband's control.
right. Okay, so it seems like there are three paradigms. I mean, I don't think the de jure de facto distinction really works, but I won't argue that. I think there are three different paradigms. One is the woman desires to have sex, she commits adultery, and then all of the sanctions apply to her. The other is at the other end of the continuum is that she is raped, she's forced into sex, and she continues to be married, there's no adultery, and so forth. And the middle one is she exercises her will to achieve, a choice of evils. She said, either you have sex with me or I'm going to blow up the bus. And in that case, which is what happens here, she has intercourse with someone who's not her husband, namely the king, but she does it in order to avoid a greater harm from occurring. And then in that third paradigm, the legal rule is that she's not an adulterer. She doesn't, her marriage isn't annulled, or her marriage isn't, she's not subject to the punishment of being an adulterer, but there's sort of an in-between sanction, which is she can no longer have relations with her lawful husband. So they remain kind of married, but they're not
No,
allowed
they
to have.
can't remain married. If you can't remain
Oh,
married.
they're not
that
remain
you're
married,
allowed-
okay.
that if you're not
But-
allowed to have relations, you can't remain married.
Okay, but she's not subject to the punishment of being an adulterer.
Right. So the only, correct, that's good. The only thing
Okay.
I would say is that that middle gray area, because it's gray,
Yeah,
there's even more gray. Because the question of how you measure how intentional her involvement is becomes itself problematic.
right,
So you know what, the factor that's meaningful here is she is initiating the meeting with Achashverosh. It's not like
Right.
Achashverosh is saying, sleep with me or else I'll kill the Jews.
right, okay.
So that's the extra step that makes this
Yeah.
really problematic in the halacha, is that she is proactively deciding that this is the way I'm going to stop this.
Right,
So that's where her own will gets credited to be more significant.
okay.
Yeah, good. All right. So now, so what I just want to point out that what it says in a couple of words at the end, there are other people that have used that have tried to say other interpretations for what she's referring to. So one other possible interpretation is that she's actually arguing on behalf of the Jewish people. And when she says to God, God, do you really want the Jewish people to suffer? Not me, not Esther for doing what she's about to do, but do you want the Jewish people to suffer, for instance, because they came and they partied with Achashverosh and with all those idol worshippers, and did they're too comfortable in the Persian Empire. So she's then, according to this interpretation, she's trying to stick up for the Jewish people. Look, there are pressures, there are social pressures. They didn't know what they were doing. They felt that this is something that they had to do, or else the king would get angry with them. So this becomes more of a question, according to this interpretation, about the pressures that Jews live with, in the diaspora, when they're under somebody else's control. So it's not about her sexual relations with Achashverosh. Then you can take your pick, one or the other. It's okay or it's not okay. But rather, so then theoretically you could take the argument, no, she'll be fine. She's exonerated from that. But meanwhile, she's asking God, are you so angry with the Jewish people that you're not going to be with me when I try to save them because of all of the terrible things that you feel that they're guilty of? Can't you see that this is something that that they're not all that responsible for, that they didn't mean it? The kind of standard ways of trying to stick up for, as a defense attorney for somebody else. So that's another suggested reading of Rabbi Levi's, the words that he puts into Esther's heart. Okay. Now we're up to the middle of that first paragraph, or perhaps
you have forsaken me because I called him, Achashverosh, a dog. As it is said, because rescue my soul from the sword, my only one from the grip of the dog.
This is all from that same psalm, from the same Psalm 22.
She therefore retracted and called him a lion. As it is said, save me from the lion's mouth.
Okay, so now this is a different idea, which is, according to this way of reading it, the way that the editor has put in the editorial explanations, maybe you're angry with me because I have no respect for Achashverosh, and I called him a dog. And even though Achashverosh is my mortal enemy, literally here, it's within his hands to kill the Jewish people. Nevertheless, he's a king, and he should be treated with respect, and he should be referred to respectfully. Maybe that's a sin that you're angry at me with, that you're angry with me about. So therefore, the psalm continues, and she retracts her characterization of her enemy as a dog, and she says, no, my enemy is a lion. So this is, if we had the psalm in front of us, we could spend time with it. I don't think we have to. So just take my word for it, that the verses switch from a contemptuous reference to the enemy that you're praying to be saved from, to actually a much more serious assessment of the enemy. Obviously, in terms of reading the psalm, this is not such a big, convincing kind of thing. But this is now what Rabbi Levi is saying about our own approaches to the people that we have a fight with. And in that respect, I think it's a very interesting insight. As a person who mostly can be identified as being on the left spectrum of social issues, political issues, and so on. One of the things that I'm very aware of is the accusation, and sometimes it's just a manipulation, but sometimes it's real, that why does the left suffer so much defeat? Why, after all, social justice is obvious. We should all be helping the poor. We should all be nice to each other. We should all be open-minded. It's like ABCs, right? Like, it's obvious. So how come it's so hard to get people to vote for liberals? How come it's so hard to get people to accept these kinds of ideas? And one of the things that comes up, and then that gets argued about, is people resent feeling that the person that's arguing with them has contempt for them. That people don't like the kind of put down attitude that they feel that the left has toward them. And this has ramifications in so many different ways, because there's a kind of a self-righteousness that comes from being righteous. And it's a real problem, psychologically, spiritually, and ethically for the person who has to deal with that themselves. And then politically, it's just it's absolutely disastrous. You're not going to convince people by talking to them, by talking down to them, and talking with contempt. So what this little funny kind of reading of the Psalms does, in my mind, is it brings up that moral issue, that you have a real fight on your hands with somebody. You're totally convinced that they are not just wrong, but maybe like really evilly wrong. But you will never win if you underestimate them, or if you disrespect them. They're not going to go away. They're not going to dissipate because you feel that they're nothing. Especially if you say it out loud, right? There's a real danger that that's going to backfire. Now, I don't have any good suggestions about how to balance that out. With also, how do you condemn evil? How do you really express your disgust for things that are advocated and things that are done? That's why you need to be, that's why you need divine help. That's why you need some real guidance about how to fight these fights in a better way. But the danger, I think, is really is a significant problem. It's a significant danger. Yeah. Any other comments about this? All right. We continue.
The following verse in the Megillah states, "And when the king noticed Queen Esther standing in the court, she won his favor, and the king extended the golden scepter to Esther." Rabbi Yochanan said,
So one second, before we get to what Rabbi Yochanan said,
Yep.
I want to just say that what we are left with at the end of the previous paragraph is, so what happened to the divine presence? Right? The divine presence leaves her when she goes into that idol worship chamber, and she begs God, you've forsaken me. What's going on here? How, I need you. And the paragraph before doesn't answer. So therefore, because of Esther's argument, God came back and embraced her again. Right? It doesn't say that, right? So it leaves us with a cliffhanger. What is going to happen here? And to a certain extent, what it heightens for us with all of its, again, kind of weird way of reading the text, and whatever, it accentuates her courage, right? It accentuates her going out on a limb, because she doesn't stop and go, oh, you forsaken me? Okay, I'm running back to my chambers. This is obviously a terrible idea, right? She keeps going, and she walks through the chamber of horrors, so to speak, and she walks toward the king to confront him. So in that sense, what that ending of the paragraph before highlights is she's doing this, right? She has made a determination, and she will literally, if it means God has abandoned me, I have not abandoned the Jewish people. Right? The paradigm for this is Moses. We had the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai, and then in a couple of weeks we'll have the problem of right, where are we? Yeah, we're going to have it in 3 Shabbatot. We'll have the golden calf episode, and we'll have Moses caught between God and Israel, right? And on the one hand, he's full of anger and takes Israel to task for their betrayal of God. But then he turns around and he says to God, I'm with them. If you want to wipe out the Jewish people, you wipe me out too. I'm not with you, I'm with them. So that paradigm is here as well, in that little, silence of the end of the paragraph. Now, what we're going to have here, as we get to what Rabbi Yochanan says, is we're going to have an answer to that question. So what did happen with God when she meets Achashverosh? Okay, Rabbi Yochanan said. No, you're on mute.
I don't do that deliberately. It just seems to have a will of its own sometimes.
I wouldn't account it as a sin as if you did it deliberately. I know you only did it, accidentally.
Under coercion.
Right, yes, I got it.
Okay. Rabbi Yochanan said, 3 ministering angels encountered her at that time, one that raised her neck, and one that endowed her with charm, and one that stretched the king's scepter towards her.
Okay, so what's the answer? What's the answer to that question I was hanging at the end of the previous paragraph? Where is God's presence?
He sent angels instead.
So you want to read
It's-
that as not quite the same thing as God's presence? Maybe that's one way to read it. But certainly there is a response. There's a divine positive response, right? Does it happen as she's walking? Doesn't quite say that. So I repeat what I was saying before. There's this kind of like a period of terror when Esther is walking all by herself to encounter the king. But then the angels come in to her aid. God sends her angels, again, like the Psalms say, may God send you angels to protect you on your way. And 3 angels, just like we had 3 angels by Abraham, we have 3 angels here, and each one has a specific task to perform. So one raised her neck. So what do we mean? What do we make of that? So look at where do we have it?
Note 22.
Yeah.
Her head was drooping from the exertions of fasting and prayer.
Right. I don't know why they put that in brackets.
Yeah, I don't know. It's odd.
But that's one interpretation. Remember, she has been fasting for 3 days and 3 nights. So she's exhausted. But now we also, this first angel straightens her up, right? Back up, head forward, look sharp. Okay, and this angel helps her to do that. So this is physical and of course also an emotional, psychological support to get her to feel better. I would say, forget about the fasting and so on. That anguish that she was feeling before, this is saying, okay, now God is coming back to her and giving her stature and a sense of self-confidence. Okay, so that's one response that God gives. The next one is one that endowed her with charm.
Charm.
Okay, what's that all about?
Well, the note isn't terribly helpful. The literal, it just gives.
That's the idiomatic expression in the Gemara. Chut shel chesed. So what, Sylvia? What'd you say?
That you become seductive.
Yeah. And here again, many of the commentators say, look, she hasn't been eating or sleeping or what for 3 days. It's not exactly like she's going to be looking her best. So even if she's proud, she's standing upright, she's convinced about her mission, she feels that God is with her, but she looks like heck. So so the angel, poof, hey, she looks pretty good. She looks good. Or what many people say is there's a certain indefinable quality, right? She has some kind of charisma. She has some kind of special attractiveness, some special magic, some special charm that is this God-given, ineffable gift that makes her. She's not conventionally. We had it before that she wasn't conventionally beautiful, and nevertheless she was irresistible. Right, when she wins the beauty contest, the Gemara makes that point. So here again, she has that kind of extra bloom about her. And that's important, like Sylvia says, because Achashverosh has to be drawn to her. Achashverosh has to be attracted to her. Okay, and then the last one is, what's the third one?
And one that stretched the king's scepter towards her.
Okay, so what it says, if you look at the note again, right? And the king extended the golden scepter to Esther. That's the verse. So now the Zohar is the Gemara. Yeah, the Gemara is reading that word extended as being not just that he put his hand out, but that there was a supernatural extra quality to that extension, and that came by the angel helping bring that scepter even closer to Esther. So why was that necessary, and what did it mean? So again, we have a suggestion in note 24.
When Esther saw Achashverosh, she thought that he was angry with her for approaching him without permission, and became overwhelmed with fear. Even after Achashverosh extended his scepter towards Esther, she could not summon the strength to walk towards it. It was therefore necessary for an angel to stretch the scepter until it reached her.
Okay. So again, what we have here in a very clunky kind of physical picture is diving into her psychology, diving into her emotions, and understanding that even at this moment, she made it all the way to the threshold, right? And when the king puts his hand out, what's going on in her mind at that moment? And what these commentators say is what's going on is panic, because that extending of the scepter could just as well be off with her head. Take her, arrest her, and get rid of her, right? When the image that comes to mind for me is that unfortunately, in certain situations, let's say a kid or an animal that's in a situation that's very fraught, and they're being confronted by their parent by their partner, by their master, somebody that has some power over them, and not just emotional power, but physical power. And then the person moves their hand out. And so many times, I think that all of us have seen scenes like that where the person flinches, where the person is worried that that moving of the hand may be to hit them or to hurt them. And what you really are trying to do is reach out your hand to embrace them. So, but they're conditioned not to read it so clearly as being that way because of all the fears that they have in their mind. So that's part of what's going on here, is that Esther is conditioned to be afraid of Achashverosh, and he has set that up. He says, "Don't anybody dare come to me unbidden. I call you, you don't call me." Right? So she knows he's a little unstable. She knows that he's got his issues. And on the one hand, she brings herself to have to do this. But then when he reacts, she can't trust his reaction right away. Right? She can't be sure that this is working. And therefore, the angel comes into play. Right? The angel comes into play to make his gesture a reaching out that then touches her and says a blessing on your head, mazel tov, yes, it's okay. It makes the gesture helpful and positive rather than what it was feared to be by Esther in her own perspective. So that's the third angel. So these angels are doing stuff that it says, in a certain sense, they're the examples that are given, straightens up her neck, raises her neck. They're all these physical outward manifestations, but really what they're talking about is profound emotional struggle, right? And that God is helping her in her moment of need after she cried out to God, you've forsaken me, I feel that you're not with me. And then God sends the angels, sends in the troops to help her out. Okay, so now we have some fun. And this, back to Jen's question before, how legally significant are the following lines? Let's see if we think that they're legally significant. Go ahead.
Burning question. The Gemara asks, and how far did the angel stretch the scepter? The Gemara records several opinions. Rabbi Yirmiyah said it was originally Yirmiyah said
Jeremiah.
Said it was originally 2 amot long, and the angel made it 12 amot long. And some say it was stretched to 16 amot, and some say it was stretched to 24 amot. In a Baraita, it was taught it was stretched to 60 amot.
Okay, so look at that. All right. Guess what? This has no legal significance whatsoever. This is just when people are telling the story. This is the way one person told the story. This is the way the other person told the story. And it depends. Are you teaching this in a Talmud class? Are you teaching this in preschool? If you're teaching it in Talmud class, so it went out through the entire chamber to her. When you're in preschool, it went at 60 amot. It was so amazing. You make it a little bit more impressive, a little bit more special. Okay. We have, before we get to the example that the Gemara gives, we have something similar happen in a biblical story where Moses is a baby. He's floating on the Nile in a basket, and Pharaoh's daughter comes to bathe in the Nile, and then she sees this baby crying. She knows it's a Hebrew baby, and she wants to save the baby. So it's an amazing story, and it's a beautiful story. We've talked about it so many times. And the Torah says that she sent her Amma to retrieve the basket. So the simple understanding is she sent a maidservant to retrieve the basket. She's the princess after all. But there's a midrash that reads it differently, that says that she sent out her hand and her hand stretched miraculously and picked up the basket out of the water. So it's a similar kind of understanding that this is obviously they were reading anime books, and they saw these pictures. We have illustrated Haggadot that show this idea of this of Pharaoh's daughter's hand stretching, way beyond a natural length. So which with the
Yeah,
idea.
that's Elastic Girl, right? Elastic Girl from The Incredibles.
There you go. There you go. That's
how
where the
many-
midrash got it from.
So how many amot did,
That's right. So then you
Did,
have to go. You have to imagine who knows how many amot she had to do.
well, but she sent her ama.
Right.
Ama. Are they just words that sound alike, or are they spelled differently as well?
They're spelled the same.
They are. All right. Well, good. Ama and ama.
Right. Okay. So now the Gemara. Accidentally or on purpose, you're on mute.
I had put the mouse and ama away from my hand, and nonetheless, it decided to
Those mice, you try to keep stuff away from the mice, forget it.
forget
They
it.
know how to stretch themselves.
That's right. That's right. The Gemara records two more instances in which something was miraculously stretched to a length of 60 amot. And similarly, you find the arm of Pharaoh's daughter. Look at that. That is miraculously stretched to 60 amot when she extended her hand to reach for the baby Moses as he lay in a basket in the Nile River. And similarly, you find with the teeth of the wicked that they were stretched to 60 amot. As it is written, the teeth of the wicked you have broken. And Reish Lachish said, do not read this as it is written, you broke, rather read it as if it were written, you extended.
Okay. So look at note 27.
Note 27, the Gemara in Barachot relates, the giant Og, king of Bashan, wished to annihilate the Jewish nation as it encamped in the desert. He uprooted a mountain large enough to bury the entire camp and carried it on his head. God sent ants to attack Og. They bored a hole in the mountain, causing it to sink around his neck. Then God extended Og's teeth on either side of his face so that he would not be able to remove the mountain from his head. The Baraita quoted here teaches that his teeth were stretched to a length of 60 amot.
Okay. And it's all there in the Torah. So don't worry. It's right there. Not okay. But those are two, again, two imaginative, playful, exuberant ways of imagining, salvation coming in these kinds of surprising ways. Okay. And now we'll go one last one.
The Gemara cites another opinion on the stretching of Ahasuerus's scepter. Rabbi Bar Ofran said in the name of Rabbi Eliezer, who had heard it from his teacher, who in turn had heard it from his teacher, it was stretched to 200 amot. It's like a game of telephone.
Exactly. Where do we have something similar in a traditional text that we traditionally skip? The answer is in the Haggadah. In the traditional Haggadah, right before we get to the final, breaking the matzah and so on, we talk about the plagues, right? We talk about the plagues.
Yeah.
And we say, here are the 10 plagues, and we take out the wine for each of the 10 plagues. But we have a whole midrash there that says that the 10 plagues that the Egyptians suffered in Egypt were nothing compared to the plagues that they suffered at the Red Sea. And then they have a verse there that has a number of words of wrath and retribution against Egypt, and So you have different sages going, how do you know that every plague that was at the Red Sea was equal to 5 plagues at the, that, you know, that, and so on. So therefore in Egypt, they had 10 plagues, but in the Red Sea, they had 50 plagues. And then you had somebody else, are you kidding? In Egypt, they had 10 plagues. At the Red Sea, they had, 100 plagues. And then somebody else goes, are you kidding? On Egypt, they had 10 plagues. At the Red Sea, they had 250 plagues. So this is the same kind of, game that they're involved in, when, it's the post-game analysis, of saying, oh, wow, this was so amazing. This was, unbelievable. That person threw a touchdown pass. It must have been 500 yards that they threw the pass, or something like that. So, go through that kind of exaggeration as a way of celebrating the unexpected salvation, the unexpected victory. Okay. And this is an ancient tradition, right? From the teacher, from the teacher, from the teacher, from the teacher, right? Okay.
The Megillah
Well, let's go a little further.
The Megillah states further, the king said to her, what do you want, Queen Esther, and what is your petition? Even if
5b3, 15b3.
Even if it be half the kingdom, it shall be fulfilled.
Okay, so that's the positive response by Achashverosh. He doesn't want to kill her. Instead, he's actually charmed by her, and he says, "Yes, oh, it's so great to see you. I haven't seen you in so long. What would you like? What can I do for you? I'll even give you up to half the kingdom. I'll whatever you want. It's not too much, right? So, what is that all about?"
Achashverosh offered Esther half the kingdom, but not the entire kingdom. Neither the thing which divides, that is located in the middle of the kingdom. And what was that a reference to? The building of the temple.
Okay, so this is the way that the Gemara understands. He doesn't, and again, this is an interesting kind of Freudian statement. He doesn't say, oh, what can I'll do anything for you. Can you imagine? That's the natural thing to say, right? It's an exaggeration. Everybody knows it's an exaggeration, but it's a very nice, positive, gracious way of saying, oh, sure, I'll do anything for you. And what he says is he actually makes a point of saying, I'll do half of everything for you. I'll do half of anything for you. So what kind of business is that? What's with the half? So clearly he's got something in his mind, something he's holding back. What is he holding back? What is he afraid that she might ask? And he's not willing to go that far. So the way the Gemara understands it here, it means that he says, you can ask me anything, but do not ask me to let the Jewish people rebuild their temple. That's what you can't ask me, right? I'll be nice to the Jews. I'll give them their freedom if you want. I'll save their lives if you want, but do not ask me to let them have their temple again. Okay, that's the way that the Gemara is imagining the political calculations that the ruler is saying, because if that happens, then that's basically giving them independence. That's giving them, the self-determination that I'm not going to let them have, and he wants to control them. He wants to be the boss. To go into contemporary situations, this is the right wing's position when it comes to the Palestinians. Oh, we'll give you economic opportunity. We'll actually, even though we haven't done it in 70 years, we agree we'll put in some sewers and we'll give you all kinds of, we'll let you do all kinds of wonderful things. Do not ask for Jerusalem, right? Do not ask for real independence. We cannot do that. We will never leave you to have your own separate independence. So here's Achashverosh saying that in the minds of the Gemara, that he certainly would not be willing to be that good to the Jews. Okay, I think we're going to stop here.
Okay.
The next discussion is a little more lengthy. And next week, we're not meeting again for the final candidate. So after this coming Shabbat, that's it, then the decisions have to be made. Good luck with everybody making the choices that you want to make. So we will meet, God willing, in 2 Sundays. Okay?
Yasher
Thank you,
Koach.
everybody.
Yasher Koach.
Stay safe, everybody.